Hello, I'm Jill Marsh and I'm a Methodist minister. I'm really delighted to be sharing with you in the Cliff Festival this year and hope you're enjoying yourselves around the campfire. I've been asked to come along and I'm really happy that I can to explain to you about the work that the Methodist Church is doing in terms of trying to help us become a more fully inclusive Methodist Church. I was a minister in circuit for 20 odd years, and obviously working with the churches I was stationed to, I was involved in helping each church to be as open and welcoming to people around us as we possibly could be, to live out our calling, to be people who followed Jesus Christ, to help people engage with Jesus Christ and to become followers themselves. Then the last 5.5 years, I went to work in the Northampton Methodist District as their district mission enabler. And it was my privilege there to help the evangelism and growth team in the strategy God for All, which we've adopted across the country, living out our belief that God is for all people, regardless of who they are, and that we try to live in such a way that we share that good news with everybody. To my complete surprise, in the autumn of last year, while I was on a sabbatical, I got involved in some work writing up a report for the Methodist Church's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And while I was helping to write that report, a job was advertised and I felt God calling me to apply for it and now have that job. And it's my privilege to be the Inclusive Church Implementation Officer for the Methodist Church. It matters to me enormously that we try to get this work right in the Methodist Church because it is about the gospel. The gospel is that everyone is made in the image of God, that we each of us are made to connect with God and to live our lives fully in God's presence and to be at our full selves within the church's life. And so it's really important to me that as well as just saying those things, we make sure we have a church that lives it out. Now, sadly, and in some cases really tragically, actually, you will have come across situations where churches aren't always as welcoming as we hope that they might be, where churches sometimes act as though we are the ones that are called within this church and others don't have a right to be here. I hope that that's not true in your church, and I wanted to ask you to begin by thinking about your own experience, about the times when you have been known by God and that you've known yourself to be known by God. The times when you have known that God is calling you by name, that God understands your strengths and your weaknesses, that God knows your identity and loves you absolutely as you are. I encourage you to think about the times when God has called you to be and to do something which was beyond what you had expected. And yet alongside other people, you've been able to live out your calling and to live it in God's strength. I hope and I pray and I trust and I want to commit to the whole church, the whole Methodist Church becoming like that. And yet we do know that sometimes that's not the case. And so the work that I've come to tell you about today is called the Strategy for Justice, Dignity and Solidarity. When I first began the voluntary work of writing up this report, I was actually coming into a situation where 5 work streams of diverse people from across the breadth and richness of the Methodist Church's variety had come together into 5 groups to think about how we could be a church of justice, a church which cares about the dignity of every person, and a church in solidarity with those who have previously been excluded, either from church or from society. We care about this because this is who Jesus is. Jesus calls us to share with him in this work. And it is really interesting to me when I think back to the early days of the church, when it was really just a group of people following Jesus around, that actually those people were a mixture of people. There were people from different backgrounds and different perspectives. They didn't always agree. They didn't always value one another or even appreciate one another. And yet Jesus called them together and they followed him. I was reminded only this morning, as I read the Bible reading for today, about the story of Peter and Cornelius in Acts chapter 10, you might want to have another look at that chapter, in which these words come: God shows no partiality. It was an encounter that God engineered. God brought together these two people completely unexpectedly across boundaries where they wouldn't have expected to meet. And yet God called them together, and through that encounter changed each of them and changed the course of the church's life. The strategy for justice, dignity, and solidarity is based on the idea that God has made us all uniquely in his image. And that's a real challenge as well as a real joy, isn't it? Because it means that whenever ever I meet somebody who is new, whenever I meet somebody who is not myself, when I ever meet another person, that person is made in the image of God. And so I can learn something unique from that person about who God is and how God has acted in that person's life. This is a real blessing, and it's a way in which God has chosen to make us different people, to transform us, to challenge us, and to help us to become the people he wants us to be. So our strategy is based on the idea that it is through encounter with different other people around us, that God changes us and helps us to understand God's self better. So the strategy wants us to listen and to learn and to be open to one another, not to make prejudgments about who will or won't be able to tell us about God or teach us about God, but to be open to the Spirit of God who has made us all his children. When you get a chance to have a look at the conference report that will come, and to look at the material that will go alongside it for you to use in your churches, and when you begin to engage with it yourselves and to encourage other people to engage with this strategy, you'll find there a list of recommendations which we need to become actions across the Methodist Church. These actions help us to comply with the law, which is really important, but way beyond that, we believe these are actions which will help us to be open to the Spirit of God as we are more open to one another. They will also help us to make sure that, as far as possible, we eliminate any kind of discrimination, exclusion, or offensive attitudes towards other people. I really hope and pray that you'll engage with this report. I really hope that you'll be able to think, each one of us, not just you, me as well, that each one of us will use the strategy to consider how God might want to change our approach and our attitudes to various types of discrimination. And I hope and pray that you, as you go back to your churches, will be ready to explain and to engage with this strategy, because for me it is all about the fullness of the gospel that we find in Jesus Christ. I invite you now to say the prayer which you'll find on the screen, and thank you for listening. If you want to be in touch, my email address will be at the bottom of the screen after the prayer. Thank you.